We have Bobby Fischer playing the white pieces, Boris Spassky playing the black pieces. This is from the 1972 World Championship match. What we're going to look at is Fischer's strategic planning. Okay, so we're going to see how to take small advantages and convert them into a win in this game. All right, we're going to walk through these first moves pretty quickly. This is an English opening, and it transposes into what's called a Queen's Gambit declined. And these moves are all pretty standard book theory. And when we get to move 17, that's where we reach the start of the middle game. Or at least started the quiz questions about the middle game. Ethan remembers this game well, or the match, I guess. All right, so here's our first position. Now I want you to put in the chat. This is going to be an interactive lesson. Put in the chat, what is the name of this pawn structure? Yep, Thomas, first one to get it. Hanging pawns. These are called hanging pawns. So, with hanging pawns, the advantage of having hanging pawns is these pawns control 4 squares on the rank in front of them. So this 4th rank, black has a lot of control. They also give black more space because compare those pawns to these 2 pawns. They're back on the 2nd and 3rd rank for white, whereas the C and D pawns are the 4th rank for black. So it gives you more space having the hanging pawns. It also creates some attacking potential having that extra space. But those pawns can become potential weaknesses. So what white wants to do is white wants to get one of those pawns to push forward. Because when the pawns are separated, when you get one to move forward 1 rank, what happens is the squares in front of those pawns become easier to occupy. So you can blockade the pawns and then attack them. Right? So picture this pawn up 1, the C pawn up 1. White can control these blue squares, put the rooks on D1 and C1, start to pressure the pawns. So going for the end game is a good strategy for white here. Going for the attack is a good strategy for black. Okay, so based on that, now let's look at the other imbalances in the position. Knight on B8, not a great piece. Knight on F3 is a little bit stronger. This bishop, fairly well placed because it does still access this diagonal and defends this pawn. This bishop, kind of similar, right? It still has an active diagonal, but it's not doing a lot outside of that. Rooks are also pretty similar. Queens are pretty similar. So the main imbalance here is the pawn structure. So now, next question for you guys. Put in the chat. What is the eval in this position? It's very important in chess to always have a mindset of what is the current eval of the position? And this can either be, you can think of it as a stockfish eval, or you can create your own system, or maybe you just say white is slightly better, white is much better, black is slightly better, it's equal. What you want to know is you want to know what the eval is at all times, because that helps you go down different paths and see, okay, what's the eval down this route? What's the current eval? What's the eval down that route? Let's compare the 2 routes. Also, when you think about a position, you want to think about the risk for each side, right? So when your position is good, you want it to be a low risk position. When your position is bad, you want it to be a high risk position, especially for your opponent. You want to increase their chances of making mistakes, make the game sloppy. All right, so we got a couple answers. 0.6, 0.3, 0.347. It's a lot of sig figs. +2. So everyone is saying white's advantage. Let's see who gets the closest. Dave, 0.04. Cosme, 0.1 for black. First person saying for black. Prometheus, 0.3 for black, 0.4 for white. Ethan. All right, the answer is 0.08 for white. Dave was extremely close. Okay, so essentially this is an equal position. We talked about the plans for each side. Now in this position, Spassky plays knight to d7, and I want you to put in the chat, what is the best move for white? What would you play in this position? So we want to make these hanging pawns weaknesses for black. UPS should be out of our neighborhood in a few minutes. What is the best move for white? Put your answers in the chat. B4, Chess Simple is saying. Trying to undermine these pawns. Another B4. Rook D1. B4. Hey Yogesh, welcome. E4. Knight to D4, says Tippy. Rook F to D1. Knight D4. Knight D4. Wow, good. Okay, we got some great answers here. Even the answers that aren't the top move have the right idea. So let's look at the pawn pushes first. Pawn to B4. Pawn to C4 by black. It's kind of the right idea in general, right? We got these pawns separated. Eval's around minus 0.2. So it's the right idea, but in this case, it's not the strongest move. E4 can be met by D takes E4. That's around minus 0.4. So little advantage for black. They pick up that pawn. Rook F to D1. Perfectly good move. And I would say it's almost as good as the top move in the position. This is still around equal. But knight d7 was a slight inaccuracy, and the way to punish it is knight to d4. So a couple people got it. Tippy, Patrick, both got it. Knight to d4. So the idea with knight to d4 is you're targeting this bishop, and the bishop defends one of the potentially weak pawns. But you want to go a little bit deeper. I should also mention black cannot take the knight because of rook takes c8 check. So that pawn is pinned to the rook. But we want to go a little bit deeper here. The idea after taking the bishop is we have another move in mind next. Okay, so queen f8 played. Now we want to play knight takes e6, f takes e6, and put your answer in the chat next. What do we play here? This is the important move. If you don't play this move, black is still kind of close to equal, but this is what gives white the advantage. And really, you should see this when you say knight to d4. Had this idea in mind. Jagajit is saying pawn to e4. Any other guesses? Bishop to b5. Oh, that's a cool idea. This pawn is pinned to the rook. What else do we think? Bishop g4. Back in this pawn. Getting some good guesses. The top move is around a half a pawn advantage for white, half a point. Bishop g4 is about a quarter of a point. The second best move. The answer is pawn to e4. Jaga got it right. So what we're doing here is we're threatening e takes d5 and bishop to g4. So the move Prometheus mentioned, bishop to g4, targeting the pawns, but we want to weaken these pawns. And one thing that I should show you, if we go back here, let's say queen f8 wasn't played, and we'll give black a random move. This pawn structure after taking back with the queen and rook f to d1 is a large advantage for white. We're looking at 0.7 or higher for white. And the reason for that is because we still have the pawn weaknesses in black's camp, but black doesn't really have any compensation for those pawns. It's going to be very easy for white to simply play bishop f3, target these pawns, and black is stuck playing defense long term. Human against human, this is probably going to be a loss. I'd say about half the time at club level, and a draw close to the other half. Like, really, I don't see black winning this position very often. Okay, so in the game, pawn to e4, great move. The best reply is probably d takes e, but Spassky played pawn to d4. And now Fischer plays pawn to f4. And the idea is he wants to play pawn to e5, put these pawns on dark squares, and cement the weakness on e6. So just notice how Fischer is playing with the pawn structure, right? We had the hanging pawns, a little inaccuracy by Spassky by putting this knight on d7. And Fischer immediately says, all right, I'm going to take e6, play e4, and now this pawn is weak, and these pawns are separated. So Fischer is playing for the pawn weaknesses here. Nice positional play so far. Queen e7, pawn to e5. So we see that pawn locked on e6. Rook to b8. Bishop to c4, hitting the pawn with the king behind it. King h8. And now this is a cool move. Queen to h3. The queen shifts all the way across the board. These are not easy moves to see, creating a double attack on the weak pawn. Prometheus says, I always thought hanging pawns are good. Now I'm scared to have a pair. Aren't we worried about the connected passer, says Thomas. Great question. So yeah, you want to be very careful with protected passed pawns. This is a protected passed pawn. But in this case, the pawn's having trouble advancing. And more important is the dynamic advantage for white, this attacking potential. We have the double attack here. And as we're going to see coming up, this idea of f5 with the rook behind it puts this king in some danger. And these black pieces are a little bit clumsy, stuck over on the queen side. Not very easy for them to get back into the action. They're not creating any threats currently. So knight f8 played, defending this pawn. And I think someone in our Rochester lecture that we did in person said, how about rook takes b2? I think that is a stronger move. Because I just mentioned those rooks not doing much. Rook takes b2 would be a way for black to fight dynamically, but it is still a very large advantage for white. We're looking at least +2 after bishop takes e6. Okay, so knight f8 played in the game. Now, this is a smooth move by Fischer. He plays pawn to b3. And one thing that I've noticed when going through some of these games in preparation for the middle game class, top players are really good at sneaking in these prophylactic moves. Fischer knows that rook takes b2 is an idea here. He also knows that he has a little bit of time, that he can take one move, shut that down, and then go for his plan. Just Simple's asking, is there a general rule of thumb? How many minor pieces need to be on the board to justify the hanging pawns? Great question. I don't know of a general rule. I would guess that the side with hanging pawns would prefer 3 or 4 minor pieces. And I think once you're down to 2, it's getting a little bit dicey having the hanging pawns. And that's just kind of my, off the top of my head, general thought. One set of minor pieces or 2, you probably don't want the hanging pawns. But great question. So now after b3, pawn to a5 played. Spassky's trying to chip away. And here Fischer plays pawn to f5. And the threat is pawn to f6 with the e-pawn and the rook behind it. Black takes, rook takes. Now what I want you guys to do in the chat, this is going to be a little bit of typing. Type out what the imbalances are and what you believe the eval is. Hey Lucas, welcome. Type out the imbalances and the eval. See what you guys think. And this is how you should be thinking about all your positions. You want to kind of have an idea of strengths and weaknesses in the position. That's what I call imbalances. And you always want to kind of have in your mind, what is the current eval of the position? That'll help us find a plan. Those two things. Okay, we got space advantage. Yep, space advantage for white. Good bishop against bad knight. Christian saying a 1.8 eval. Matt is saying, what's in the cup? It's coffee, Matt. Made coffee. White is the better minor pieces and the open F file. Safer king for white. Yep, that's right. Okay, good. You guys are on the right track. And the eval is around 2.9. So pretty big advantage for white. So now we want to use our space and the lack of king safety for black. That's how we're going to push for the advantage. Okay, black is saying connected passers. White has better minor pieces, more active rooks, better king safety. Yep, king safety, space, bishop, F file from Dennis. Yeah, you guys are all on the right track. Jaga, same thing. Good, just simple. Good, good. Okay. So knight h7 played. Rook f to c1, doubling on the F file, trying to sink that rook into f7 soon. The black king is unsafe because of the um, white pieces all surrounding it and the fact that this is gone, Matt. So, like this bishop hitting g8, the king is trapped right now. And this can cause some tactical problems. And also, picture like a rook coming into f7, maybe something happening on g7. So it's the potential for these white pieces to all attack the openings around the black king. Whereas this king, even though the f-pawn's gone, there's nothing that can get on this diagonal, and there's no black pieces even threatening, even remotely threatening to attack him. And that's why earlier black probably should have considered that rook takes b2 move, or should have played it, because at least it's starting to try to look at the white king, right? Grab that pawn and fight for some dynamic play. Whereas right now, black is just sitting back playing defense, which is never a great idea. So queen d8 played, queen g3, rook e7, and now pawn to h4. What he's doing is he's shutting down that knight. Knight g5 was a potential idea for Spassky. Fischer saying, nope, you're not going to play that. Rook b7, e6. This is a hard move to play. It blocks the bishop, but it also cements that pawn all the way up on the 6th rank. And Fischer has another idea in mind. His queen can come to e5 soon. Rook to c7, queen e5, winning that pawn. She's also tying down the rook to defend the c5 pawn. Queen e8. And now look at this move by Fischer. Spassky could play a4 on the next move. That's an idea for black. He goes a4 himself. It looks like he's, breaking all the rules. He made a backward pawn. He's putting all the pawns on light when his bishop is already on light squares. But this is why you have to always think about rules in terms of the current position. Every chess rule has exceptions. In this case, he knows that he's putting all of these pawns on light to shut down black's play. This bishop can come back to d3 later and get on this diagonal. Queen d8, and Spassky's just shuffling. Notice how he can't do anything productive. Eric is asking, how do you see counterplay like that? Great question. So in these kind of positions, I like to always think about the risk and reward, right? So if we go back to when a4 was played. During the game, you don't know what the eval is here. Stockfish is saying +5. I probably wouldn't feel this as a full +5. Say it's a classical game. I might think I'm up like 2.5 or 3 here from the white side. I know I have full control of the position. When you have full control of the position and you have the advantage, not only are you looking for ways to increase the advantage and looking for knockout blows, you want to constantly be thinking, what would I do if I were black? How would I fight back and make the position messy if I were playing the opponent's side? That's how you find these moves. And then once you think, so a4 is not a super strong move here, but once you think of an idea for the opponent, like pawn to a4, now you start to weigh your options, right? Do I take one move to play a4? Do I go ahead with my attack and do h5 or something else, or bishop d3, queen e4? You can start to weigh those options. In this case, because Fischer has full control, I think the option is pretty easy. Like you just say, okay, I'm going to play a4. Black's really in trouble here. They're not going to be able to consolidate. Black's not even up any material. That's a great question, Eric. Okay, so now there's a little bit of shuffling by Fischer. He moves the rook a couple times. But this is where he starts to make progress. Bishop d3. Look at that, eyeing the h7 square. Queen e8, queen e4 with the threat of rook to f8 check. And that's going to be a mate in 3. Because if black takes back with the knight, let's just give black a bad move. Rook to f8 check. If black takes back with the knight, the other rook goes to f8, and then queen h7 mate. So cool threat by Fischer, and this is something you should do in your own games too. When you have an advantage like this, it's not always easy to just immediately get the knockout blow. Sometimes what you want to do is keep poking and prodding. Create more threats, look for new targets, right? So this is a new idea by Fischer. He just shifted these pieces onto this diagonal to create a new threat. Knight f6 played. Now put your answers in the chat. What is the best move for white? This is where we got to think tactics. Just simple saying charge up the battery. That's right. Put in the chat. What's the best move for white? I think the The delay with the chat is a little bit longer today than usual. It feels like about a 10-second delay. Rook takes f6, rook takes f6, rook takes knight. You guys are good. Rook takes f6. Dave's saying rook h5. Oh, rook h5 is interesting. Maybe queen takes. Rook f6. So rook f6 is the top move. Brilliant move. Fischer found it. G takes f. Rook takes f6. Black is up 1 point of material, but the position is completely losing for black. The game went king g8, bishop c4, king h8, queen f4. The problem is queen takes h6 is a threat, rook to f8. Fork is a threat. Nothing black can do. So Spassky resigned. So that was a 41 move game. And we started in this position on move 17 with the hanging pawns. And just the way that Fischer said, okay, I'm going to take the hanging pawns, create it into this pawn structure, target your light square pawns after e4, right? Separate the hanging pawns, create that new weakness. And he just started pushing ahead, and now he said, okay, we're not even close to that hanging pawn structure anymore. Now it's all about king safety, space, and he just says, I'm going to shut down your play and attack kingside at the same time. Inserts that a4, shifts to this diagonal. Just beautiful. And then, boom, finishes off with the tactic. What a game by Fischer. Rook takes h6 immediately here. Still winning for white, so that would be fine.